There's a thing nobody tells you about mercy. It don't announce itself. It don't ride in loud, with a flag and a trumpet and a name you'll remember. Most times mercy shows up quiet, a man who doesn't say a word, kneeling in the dirt next to somebody the whole world already decided wasn't worth the trouble. I've kept a ledger every day of my life since I was 11 years old. Numbers don't lie to you the way people do. Cattle bought, cattle sold, rain that came and rain that didn't. I wrote down the day my wife died, and I wrote down the price of the coffin in the same steady hand, because that's how I stayed standing. But there's a page in that ledger I never could balance. One winter, one woman they threw away like a broken tool, and one silent man from the mountains who looked at her, really looked at her, when nobody else would, and did the thing that cost him everything. I'm an old man now. My hands shake. But I'm going to tell you what I saw, because if I take it to the grave with me, then it never happened at all. And it happened. God help me, it happened. The morning they drove her out of Cañon Blanco, the sky was the color of old tin and there wasn't a breath of wind to carry the shouting off. So the shouting just hung there, over the whole town, like smoke that wouldn't lift. I was standing on the porch of Dover's Mercantile with a sack of nails I hadn't paid for yet. And I remember I set that sack down real slow, the way you set something down when your hands have started to sweat and you don't know why. There were maybe 30 of them in the road, might have been 40. When a crowd gets to a certain size, it stops being people and becomes one animal, one big stupid animal with too many mouths, and this one was moving toward the edge of town with a woman at the front of it. Not walking. Carried, no. Dragged is the word. Two men had her by the arms and her feet were catching on the ruts, and every time she stumbled somebody laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd seen all week. Her name was Inia Cutes. I didn't know that yet. That morning she was just her, the thing the town had decided to be rid of. I want to tell you I stepped down off that porch. I want to tell you I did something. I didn't. I stood there with my thumb hooked in my belt and I watched, same as everybody else who wasn't doing the dragging. That's the shameful truth and I'm too old to dress it up. Watching is its own kind of participation. I learned that later. Took me years. She wasn't fighting anymore by the time they got her level with the Mercantile. She'd fought earlier. I could see it in the state of her, the sleeve torn clean off her dress, blood dried at the corner of her mouth, a whole cheek gone purple-black. But something in her had gone quiet, not broken quiet. Worse, the quiet of somebody who's run all the numbers in her own ledger and understands there's no column left where this comes out right. Preacher Hollies walked in front of them with his Bible held up over his head like a lantern, like he was leading them somewhere holy. He had a voice that carried. He was using all of it. We do not judge. He was hollering, which was rich, considering. We only ask her to carry her sins somewhere it won't poison the well. The well, that's what they said she'd done, poisoned it. Now here's what actually happened, and I only pieced it together after. From a dozen crooked accounts I had to file down against each other till they made a shape. The Alvarez baby had died. Little thing, not 2 months old, went blue in its crib one cold night and never came back. Terrible. Truly. I've buried enough of my own to know there's no bottom to that particular grief. But grief has to land somewhere. Grief that can't find a reason will invent one, and it'll pick the softest target it can find. And Inia Cutes, a widow, foreign, kept to herself, gathered herbs out past the tree line and sometimes sold them, sometimes gave them, to women who couldn't afford Doc Farley's laudanum. Inia Cutes was the softest target Cañon Blanco had. Somebody said they saw her near the Alvarez place. Somebody said she'd looked at the baby funny at the Sunday gathering. Somebody said, and this is the one that lit the fire, that she wasn't right in her faith, that the herbs were witchcraft, that the well-tasting bitter that same week wasn't the dead cottonwood rotting in it upstream. Oh no, it was her. You put those somebodies together in a scared town, and you get a mob by Thursday. I know how that sounds, superstitious, backwards. You're thinking those were different times. Maybe. But I've watched people do the same math since in nicer clothes in newer towns, and the answer always comes out the same. A frightened crowd would rather kill the thing it doesn't understand than sit one more night with a fear it can't name. They took her past the last building and out onto the flat, where the road gives up being a road and becomes just the direction you go when you're leaving. And there they let her go. Threw her down, more like. She landed on her hands and knees in the caliche, and I saw her palms come up shredded. "Don't come back," Holly said, quieter now. The animal had gotten what it wanted and was already losing interest the way they do. "There's nothing here for you. Go on and die somewhere that isn't ours." Then they turned around, all of them. 30, 40 people turning their backs at once, and don't let anybody tell you a mob is dramatic at the end. It isn't. It's the most ordinary thing in the world. They just went home, went back to their coffee and their chores and their children. One man clapped another on the shoulder. Somebody made a joke. Somebody laughed. And Iniakutes knelt out on the flat with her ruined hands, alone, under that tin-colored sky. I picked up my sack of nails. I went inside and paid Dover for them. My hand was steady when I counted out the coins. I noticed that. I remember hatting myself for how steady it was. Here is a thing about me you should know, so you understand why I did what I did next, which wasn't much, but was more than the nails. 3 years before, I'd lost my Marguerite to the fever. And in the worst of it, when I was out of my head with grief and hadn't slept in 4 days and had started, if I'm honest, thinking about the river and how cold and quiet it would be, a woman I'd never met came up my road with a basket. She left a jar of something on my porch. Broth, and under it, wrapped in cloth, a bundle of dried leaves with instructions in a hand I couldn't read. I threw it out. Figured it for charity I didn't want. I found out 2 years later from Dover, of all people, that the woman had been the herb gatherer, Iniakutes. She'd heard from somebody that the rancher out past the creek had gone strange with sorrow and might do himself harm. She didn't know me, owed me nothing. She just came, left food, left medicine, went home. I'd thrown it in the wash. So when I stood in that mercantile with my paid-for nails, and I looked out the dusty window at the shape of her still kneeling out on the flat, growing small, that debt sat down on my chest and would not get off. I didn't go to her. I want to be clear. I'm not the hero of this. I was a coward, and I went home to my ranch and I did my evening chores and I ate cold beans standing up at my own window, staring out at the mountains going purple in the dusk, and I told myself she'd find her way to another town. People do. It's a big country. She'd be all right. I even wrote it in the ledger. I've still got the page. Nails 40 paid, whether holding all well. All well, God forgive me. The man came down out of the mountains on the second day. I didn't see him arrive. Nobody did, which was the thing about him. He moved through country the way water moves, finding the low, quiet places, and you'd look up and he'd just be there, 10 feet away, and your heart would slam. Half Apache, folks said, though I never learned the whole of it and it wasn't mine to ask. His mother's people were Chiricahua. His father had been a Scotsman who trapped the high country and died up there, and the son had stayed on in the peaks alone for so long that the town had a name for him that wasn't a name at all. The Silent One. El Calado. Some just called him the Mountain Man and spat after, the way they did. He didn't come to town. He never came to town. Which is how I know that what happened next, he did on purpose and it cost him, and he did it anyway. Here's what I got later, from the Gara boy who'd been out setting rabbit snares and saw the start of it. The mountain man found her on the flat where they'd left her, 2 days without water. She was still alive, barely, curled up in the meager shade of a creosote bush, which is no shade at all, her lips split, one of those ruined hands pressed to her chest like she was holding something in. He knelt down next to her in the dirt. The Gara boy said he didn't say anything. Of course he didn't. He just knelt there a long moment, looking at her face the way, the boy said this, and it stuck in me like a burr, the way you look at somebody you're deciding to be responsible for. Then he gave her water from his own skin, a little at a time, the right way, the patient way. And when she couldn't walk, he picked her up. Not dragged, not slung over a shoulder like meat. He carried her the way you carry something you're afraid to break, and he turned back toward the mountains, and the boy watched them go until the heat shimmer swallowed them up. Now, you'd think that'd be the end of the town's business with Ineacutes. She was gone, off their conscience, up into the peaks with a man they feared and didn't understand. Problem solved, wasn't it? You'd think that, you'd be wrong, because a mob doesn't want you gone. That's the lie it tells itself. What a mob wants is to be proved right. And the moment the mountain man knelt down in that dirt and chose her, chose the one they'd all agreed was cursed, was poison, was less than a dog, he made every single one of them a liar. He held up a mirror on the whole town, and the town did not care for what it saw. By the time the story worked its way back down through the Guerra boy and got told and retold over enough dinner tables, it had grown teeth. The witch had bewitched the mountain man. He'd taken her up to the high country for God knew what. No decent man would touch her, so what did that make him? I sat in the back of the church that Sunday and listened to Preacher Hollies work himself up over it, and I watched the fear move across those faces like wind across a wheat field, all of them bending the same way, and I thought, they're going to go up there. They're not done. They're never going to be done until one of them is dead. I was right about that. I just had the wrong idea about who. I rode up into the mountains myself the following week. Told myself it was to warn him. That's what I wrote in the ledger. Rode north, warn the mountain man, town stirred up. And that was part of it, sure. But the truer part, the part I didn't write, was that debt still sitting on my chest, and the need to see with my own eyes that she was alive. That the one decent thing anybody'd done in this whole sorry business had actually taken root and grown. It's hard country up there. The trail gives out and you're picking your way through pine and granite, and the air goes thin and clean and cold even in the warm months. Took me most of a day. I near turned back twice. And when I finally found the place, a cabin tucked into a fold of the mountain, so much a part of the land you'd ride past it if you didn't know, I sat my horse at the edge of the clearing a long while before I could make myself go in. She was outside, Ineacutes, sitting on a flat rock in the last of the afternoon sun with her hands wrapped in clean cloth, and there was a little color back in her face, and she was doing the smallest, most ordinary thing. She was mending a shirt. His shirt, it must have been far too big for her, and she was drawing the needle through slow, careful, favoring those hurt hands, and there was on her face an expression I had no name for at the time and have spent the rest of my life trying to earn the right to describe. It wasn't happiness. Too much had happened for happiness. It was something quieter and more stubborn than that. It was the look of somebody who had been thrown away, and had lain down in the dirt to die, and instead had been carried, and who was now sitting in the sun, alive, mending a shirt for the man who'd carried her, because being alive means there is always one more small thing to do for somebody, and she was going to do it. She saw me and went still. I saw the fear come up in her, quick, the animal knowing what animals do. I kept my hands where she could see them. "Ma'am," I said, my voice came out rough. "You don't know me, but you left a jar on my porch 3 years back, broth and some leaves, when my wife passed and I'd gone strange." She didn't answer, just watched me, but something in her shoulders let down a 1/4 inch. "I threw it out," I said. "Didn't know what it was, didn't know it was kindness. I've been ashamed of that every day since." I swallowed. "I come to warn you, to warn the man. The town's got itself worked up. I don't think they mean to leave this be." And that's when I heard the step behind me that I hadn't heard him take, and I turned, and the mountain man was standing there at the tree line with an armload of split wood, and a face I could not read at all, looking at me the exact way the Guerra boy had described, like he was deciding something, like he was running numbers of his own. I want to tell you what he said. But he didn't say anything. Not then. He just set down the wood one piece at a time, real deliberate, and looked from me to her and back, and I understood that whatever came down that mountain next, This quiet man had already made his peace with it, and was only now working out where I fit. I've thought about that moment 10,000 times. The wood, his hands, her needle stopped in the cloth, the cold, clean air and the town down below already sharpening itself, and none of us yet knowing. The mountain man's name was Tsela. I didn't learn it from him. He never told me a single thing about himself the whole time I knew him, and I came to understand that silence wasn't a wall he'd built. It was just the shape he'd been worn into, the way a stone in a creek gets smooth. No, I learned his name from Iniakutes, 3 nights later, sitting at their little table while a storm walked back and forth across the peaks, and the two of them let me stay because riding down in that weather would have killed me. She said it soft, the way you say a thing you're not sure you're allowed to. Tsela. And she looked at him across the room where he was working an awl through a strip of leather, and he didn't look up, but the corner of his mouth moved. Just barely. And I thought a man can go his whole life and never be looked at like that even once, and here's this one, up a mountain, hunted, and he's got it. I've kept a ledger every day since I was 11. I want to write down here, plain, the thing I understood that night, because it took me a long time to get it into words and I don't want it lost. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be chosen, and most of them die waiting. But every so often the world coughs up a person who doesn't wait, who sees somebody lying in the dirt and just decides, right then, no committee, no proof, no permission, you. I choose you. Get up. And it's the closest thing to holy I ever saw, and I saw it done by a man the town called a devil, for a woman the town called a witch, and I have never once been able to make that math come out any other way than. The town was the devil, and those two were the only Christians in 50 miles. But I'm getting ahead. Let me go back down the mountain, because that's where the trouble was breeding. It started with Cyrus Pell. You'd have to know Cyrus to understand, and I'm sorry to say I knew him well. We'd run cattle on neighboring range for 15 years. He was the kind of man who kept a grievance the way other men keep a good knife, oiled, sharpened, close to hand. His wife had died young and he'd never remarried, and somewhere in the long sour years alone, he'd got the idea fixed in his skull that the world owed him something it kept refusing to pay. Every misfortune was a robbery. Every man luckier than him was a thief. And when the story came down the mountain, the witch, alive, the devil sheltering her, the two of them up there together in defiance of everything the town had decided was true, Cyrus took it personal. I don't fully know why. I've turned it over 100 times. Best I can figure, it was the contentment of it. The idea that two outcasts, two people the world had thrown away, could be up on that mountain happy, while he, a respectable landowning white man, sat down here alone and bitter in a house that echoed. It ate at him. It genuinely ate at him. That someone with less than nothing had found something he couldn't. Spite's a fuel that never runs dry. That's the terrible thing about it. Grief burns out. Anger burns out. But spite you can run a man on for 20 years, and Cyrus Pell had a full tank. He started talking. In the mercantile at the feed lot on the church steps, not loud. Cyrus was too smart to holler. He worried. That was his gift. He'd stand there shaking his head slow and say, I just hate to think of a white man's soul up there in the grip of that woman, and let it sit and move on. He'd say, you know the Prout girl's been poorly since the well went bad. Wonder does the cause of it still live close enough to keep working her mischief? He never accused. He just kept setting little fires and walking away, and a dry town catches easy. I know all this because he tried to recruit me. He rode out to my place on a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday because I just finished tallying the month, and the ledger was still open on my table when he knocked. He came in, sat down uninvited, and got right to it in that low, worried voice. You went up there, he said. Folks saw you ride north, you seen 'em. I said I had. And he leaned in. His eyes had a shine to them I didn't like. Is it true what they say, she got him under something? I looked at him a long moment. And I want to tell you I said the brave thing. I want to tell you I stood up and told Cyrus Pell to get out of my house and take his poison with him. I didn't, not right then. I was still a coward still the man who'd stood on the mercantile porch and watched. What I said was, "She's mending his shirts, Cyrus." That's what I seen, a woman mending a shirt. And Cyrus sat back and smiled, and I understood I'd said exactly the wrong thing because to a man like Cyrus, mending his shirt wasn't innocence. It was proof. It was intimacy, it was permanence. It was two people building a life where he'd decided no life was allowed. His smile got wider and colder. "So she's dug in," he said, mostly to himself, "playing house." He stood up, obliged for the coffee. I hadn't given him any. He left, and I sat there with my ledger open and my stomach turned to water because I just handed a spiteful man the one detail that would let him convince the whole town this was serious. I wrote in the ledger that night. Pell came, said too much. Fix this. I underlined fix this twice. The paper tore a little under the pen. I've still got that page too. You can see where the ink pressed through. Now I have to tell you about the part I'm least proud of, and then the part that started to buy it back, so bare with an old man. For 3 weeks I did nothing. That's the shameful arithmetic. I knew Cyrus was building towards something. I could feel the town tightening the way you feel weather in a bad knee. And I did my chores and I tallied my herd and I told myself it wasn't mine to fix, that I'd warned them up on the mountain and warned was all I owed. And I stayed in my safe, cowardly little routine because routine is where cowards live. What broke me out of it was a small thing. It usually is. I was in the mercantile, Dover's again, always Dover's. The whole town's business ran through that dusty little room, and there was a girl there. The Alvarez girl. The older sister of the baby that had died, the baby that started all of it. She couldn't have been more than 9. And she was standing at the counter with her mother, and her mother was buying thread, and the girl was looking at a jar of penny candy with the particular hunger of a child who knows better than to ask. And I heard her mother say quiet to Dover, not knowing I was listening, "They're getting up a party, Cyrus and the men, to go up the mountain and settle it." And Dover said, "Lo, settle it how?" And the mother didn't answer, and the not answering was the answer. And then the little girl who'd lost her baby brother, who'd been told a witch had killed him, who had every child's reason in the world to hate. The little girl tugged her mother's sleeve and said, "Mama, is the witch lady the one who's going to be dead?" She said it plain, curious, the way children say the unspeakable thing before the world has taught them to dress it up. And her mother said, "Hush, just hush." I stood there in the mercantile with a can of peaches in my hand, and I felt something turn over in my chest, hard, like a wheel dropping into a rut. Because I'd been telling myself a story where this was complicated, where there were two sides, where a wise man stayed out of it and let the town sort its own affairs. And it wasn't complicated at all. It was a 9-year-old girl asking, in a general store, on an ordinary afternoon, whether the grown-ups were going to murder a woman. And every adult in earshot, including me, was going to let her keep believing that was a normal thing to wonder about. I put the peaches back. I didn't buy anything. I walked out to my horse and I stood there with my forehead against the saddle for a while, and then I got up and rode not home. North. Up the mountain, hard in the failing light, which is a fool's way to ride that country, and I near broke my horse's leg twice. I had to warn them again, and this time I had to do more than warn. I didn't know what yet, but I knew warned is all I owe had died in that mercantile, next to a jar of penny candy, and it wasn't ever coming back. I reached the cabin near midnight. There was no moon. I could have ridden right past it, but I saw the orange line of firelight under the door, and I called out from the trees so Tsella wouldn't put a knife in me for a shadow. He opened the door with the knife anyway. Then he saw it was me and stepped back to let me in, and that was as much of a welcome as Tsella gave anybody, and I'd learned by then it was a considerable one. Iniakutes was up. She'd been sleeping poorly. I think there were shadows under her eyes, and her hands were still wrapped though the cloth was clean, and she was better than she'd been, but a body doesn't come back from 2 days dying in the sun all at once. She saw my face and she knew. Women who have been hunted know the smell of it coming. She sat down slow at the little table and folded her wrapped hands in front of her and said, "How many?" Not is it true, not are you sure, just how many. Already doing the arithmetic, already the survivor. Enough, I said. Cyrus Pell's leading it, and when Cyrus leads a thing he doesn't stop till it's done. And here's the moment, here's the moment I came all this way up a mountain in the dark to tell you about, the one I've never been able to balance in the ledger. I turned to Tsella and I said the coward's kindness, the thing that lets everybody off the hook. You should run, both of you. There's country north of here over the divide where they'll never follow. You could be gone by dawn. I'll tell 'em you lit out weeks ago. And Tsella shook his head. Once slow. And then this man who I had never heard string 3 words together in the whole time I'd known him. This man the town called silent like it was an insult. He looked at me, and he looked at Aniakutes, and he said, in a voice like gravel under a slow wheel, "She has run enough." That was all, she has run enough. And Aniakutes made a sound I won't try to describe. And I understood, standing there in that fire-lit cabin with my hat in my hands, that I had just offered them the exact thing the town had offered, go die somewhere that isn't ours dressed up in kinder clothes, and that Tsella had seen straight through it. The way he saw through everything, because a man who says nothing spends all his time watching, and a man who spends all his time watching learns to see. Running was still exile. Running was still the town winning. Running still meant that the answer to they threw a woman in the dirt was, and so she left forever. And Tsella had carried her up out of that dirt precisely so that she would never again be a thing that got left. He would not make her run again, even if it killed him. Especially, I came to understand, even if it killed him, because a man who has decided to be responsible for somebody does not measure the cost. He just pays it. And Tsella had done his measuring down on that flat weeks ago when he first knelt in the caliche, and there was nothing left to weigh. I sat down. My legs had gone out from under me a little. "All right," I said. "All right, then we don't run." And I noticed I'd said we, and so did they, and nobody corrected it, and that's the moment I stopped being the man on the mercantile porch. It took me 40-some years and a 9-year-old girl and a jar of penny candy and a mountain ridden in the dark, but that's where it happened, at a small table, saying we about a fight I couldn't win. We had 2 days, maybe 3. Cyrus would want to come in daylight. A mob likes to see itself, likes the reassurance of all those faces agreeing, so we had until whatever morning he'd chosen, and we didn't know which. I'll tell you what we did with the time, because it matters, and because it's the part that surprised me most. I thought we'd fortify, dig in. That's what my mind went to. I'm a practical man. I think in fences and provisions, and my first instinct was how do we make this cabin hard to take? And Tsella let me talk about it for a while, sight lines and water and all of it, and then he shook his head again and I realized he had a different plan entirely, one I'd never have arrived at in 100 years because it didn't come from fear. He wasn't going to fight them. He was going to meet them. I argued, God, I argued. I said they'd cut him down where he stood. Said a mob that's ridden a day up a mountain to kill isn't going to be talked out of it. Said his silence that worked so well on me would read as guilt to men looking for guilt. All true, all useless, because Tsella had understood something about the town that I, who'd lived in it my whole life, had missed. He'd understood that Cyrus needed him to be a devil. The whole thing only worked if the men riding up that mountain could believe they were hunting a monster, a silent, inhuman thing that had stolen a white man's no, that had bewitched, that had corrupted, that was less than human and so could be killed like less than human. That's the story that lets 30 ordinary men murder somebody and ride home to supper. It's the story that let them drag Aniakutes down the road while the crowd laughed. The mob doesn't kill people. It only ever kills monsters. That's the trick it plays on itself. And Tsella's plan, the plan of a man who had said maybe 40 words to me in as many days, was to stand in front of them where they could see his face and not be a monster, to make it hard, to make them do it in the daylight to a man who looked back at them like a man. Because some of them, not Cyrus, Cyrus was lost, but some of them might not be able to do it, if it wasn't a devil in front of them but only a tired, quiet man standing between them and a woman mending shirts. It was the bravest thing I ever heard, and I told him it was suicide and I was right, and he did it anyway. Ineacutes didn't argue. I looked at her, expecting her to argue, expecting her to beg him to run, to choose the sure thing, to not die for her. And she didn't. She sat very still, and her wrapped hands were shaking a little, and there were tears standing in her eyes that did not fall, and she looked at him with that same stubborn, holy look from the first day, and she said something to him in a language I didn't know. Soft. Just a few words. I asked her later, much later, what she'd said. She wouldn't tell me for years. And when she finally did, on a porch a long way from that mountain and a long time after, she said it had been this. Then I stand with you. I have finished running too. She wasn't going to hide in the cabin while he faced them alone. She was going to stand next to him, in the daylight, in front of the men who'd left her to die, the woman they called a witch, refusing to be hidden, refusing to be a monster, refusing every single story the town had told about her, and just be a woman, standing next to the man who'd chosen her, so that when Cyrus Pell came up the mountain to kill two devils, he'd find instead two people holding hands. I have never in my life been so afraid, and so I don't have the word. Proud is too small. Undone, I was undone. And I, the coward from the mercantile porch, the man who threw kindness in the wash and said too much to Cyrus Pell and did nothing for 3 weeks. I stood up from that little table where I'd said we, and I checked the loads in the old rifle I'd brought, and I took my place on the third side of them, so that whatever came up that mountain would have to come through all three. Not because I thought we'd win. Because some fights you don't stand in to win. You stand in them so that afterward, whatever's left, the ledger reads true, so that the page says what happened, so that if a 9-year-old girl ever asks, is the witch lady the one who's going to be dead, there's at least one line written somewhere that answers her back, no. Not without 3 people standing in the way, not without it costing. We didn't sleep. We waited. And on the second morning, gray and windless, the same tin-colored sky as the day they threw her out, we heard the horses coming up through the pines. More than I'd hoped, fewer than I'd feared, and out in front on a tall bay, worrying his grievance like a good sharp knife, rode Cyrus Pell. There were 11 of them. I counted. Of course I counted. It's the only thing I've ever known how to do when I'm afraid. Put a number on the thing so it can't be bigger than it is. 11 riders coming up through the pines in the gray morning, and Cyrus Pell out front on his tall bay, and behind him the town made small and cold, and stupid the way a town always is when it rides somewhere to do a thing it wouldn't do one man at a time. I knew most of their faces. That was the worst of it. There was Del Harmon, who'd helped me pull a heifer out of the bog 3 springs back and laughed about it after over whiskey. There was the elder Prout boy, barely 20, riding because his sister was poorly and somebody had told him whose fault that was. There was Otto Reyes, who sang bass in the church choir and had a voice like a warm cellar. Ordinary men. Neighbors. I want you to hold on to that, because it's the whole point of everything I'm telling you. They were not monsters. If they'd been monsters, it would be a smaller, easier story. They were the men I bought nails alongside, and they had ridden a day up a mountain to kill a woman for mending a shirt. We stood in the clearing in front of the cabin, the 3 of us. Cello in the middle, no weapon in his hands. He'd left the knife inside on purpose, and I understood why, though it made my skin crawl. Ineacutes on his left, standing straight, her wrapped hands at her sides, her chin up, that same stubborn, holy set to her jaw. And me on his right, and I'll be honest, I had the rifle. I'm not the man Sella was. I couldn't stand there empty-handed. But I held it low, muzzle to the dirt. That was the compromise I'd made with my own fear in the dark hours. I won't hide it, and I won't raise it first. The riders spread into a loose line at the edge of the clearing and stopped. Their horses blew and stamped. Somebody's saddle creaked. And for a long moment nobody said anything at all, and that silence, that was Tsella's silence, working on them the way it had worked on me the first day. The silence of a man just looking back, and I saw a couple of them shift in their saddles under it. Cyrus broke it because Cyrus had to. Silence was the enemy of what Cyrus was selling. "Step away from her," he said to Tsella, loud enough to reach the men behind him. Everything Cyrus said was really said to the men behind him. "Step away and ride off, and there's no quarrel with you. It's her we come for. You know what she is." And Tsella didn't step away. And Tsella didn't speak. He just looked at Cyrus Pell with those dark, steady eyes. "And this is the thing, this is the thing I've never been able to put right in the ledger." He took Iniacute's wrapped hand, in front of all of them, slow and deliberate so every man there could see it. He took the hand of the woman they'd called a witch, the ruined hand still healing from the day they'd thrown her in the caliche, and he held it and he stood there. He wasn't going to give them a monster. That was his whole war, and he fought it with a held hand. I watched it land on them. I watched it man by man. Del Harmon looked away first, down at his saddle horn, jaw tight. The Prout boy went pale and confused, because whatever picture he'd built in his head riding up here, it hadn't had this in it, hadn't had a tired, quiet man holding a hurt woman's hand like she was worth something. Otto Reyes, the choir singer, went very still. You could see it moving through the line like cold water finding low ground. This doesn't look like what we were told. Cyrus felt it too, felt his mob softening under him. And a man like Cyrus, when he feels the thing slipping, he doesn't ease off, he doubles down. He reaches for the biggest lie he's got, because he can't afford for them to start thinking. "She poisoned the Alvarez child," he shouted. "She poisoned the well. You've all seen the Prout girl waste away. You want your own next. You want to bury your own bobbies while this," he flung his hand at Iniacute's, "this thing sits up here safe and laughing. A witch don't get to live comfortable up a mountain while decent folk grieve." And there it was, the whole rotten engine of it out in the open. A witch don't get to live comfortable. Not she killed, he didn't have that, none of them ever had that, but she doesn't get to be all right when we're not. Cyrus Pell's whole spite, the 20-year tank of it, right there in one sentence. He couldn't stand that 2 thrown-away people had found something. That was the crime. That was always the crime. And I don't know where it came from. I'd stood on a mercantile porch and watched them drag her and said nothing. I'd said too much to Cyrus at my own table. I'd done nothing for 3 weeks. I was the coward of this whole story, and I knew it. But something about that word, comfortable, the pettiness of it, the sheer small ugliness of riding a day up a mountain to kill a woman, because she'd stopped being miserable enough to suit you. I stepped forward, and I heard my own voice come out of me, and it didn't shake. And I've been grateful for that steadiness every day since the way I once hated it. "The well went bad from the dead cottonwood upstream," I said. "I pulled it out myself in April, half-rotted, lying right across the flow. Anybody could have walked up there and seen it. Anybody who wanted the truth more than they wanted somebody to blame." I looked down the line of them, face by face. "The Alvarez baby died the way Bobby's died, Del. You buried 2 of your own that way. Did a witch do those? Or did they just die, the way little ones do, and it broke your heart, and there was nobody to hang it on?" Del Harmon looked at me. His eyes were wet. He didn't say anything, but he looked at me, and I saw him come back into himself a little, saw the neighbor surface up through the mob. "I've known most of you my whole life," I said. My voice was going now, I couldn't have stopped it. "And I'm telling you what I saw with my own eyes. That woman there left medicine on my porch when I'd gone strange with grief and might have done myself harm. She didn't know me, owed me nothing. She just came. That's the witch. That's the poisoner. A woman who fed a stranger who wanted to die." I pointed at Tsella, and my hand was steady, God help me, steady as a fence post. "And that man carried her up out of the dirt when the rest of us, when I stood on Dover's porch and watched her get dragged and did nothing. You want to know who the devil is on this mountain? Look at the ones who came up here to kill, not the 2 who came up here to live." Silence, real silence this time. The horses blew. Wind moved in the high pines, that clean, cold sound. And I watched the mob die. That's the only way to say it. A mob is one animal, I told you that, and I watched it come apart back into 11 separate men, each one alone again inside his own skull with his own conscience, which is the one thing a mob exists to spare you from. The Prout boy was crying and trying not to. Otto Reyes had dropped his eyes. Del Harmon actually backed his horse up a step out of the line, and once one man breaks a line, the line is broken. Cyrus felt it go. And I watched something come apart in him too, but it wasn't conscience. Cyrus didn't have the parts for that. What came apart in Cyrus was control. The story was slipping and the men were waking up, and in about 10 more seconds he was going to be exactly what he'd always most feared being, which was a bitter, lonely man that nobody followed, alone on a tall horse having ridden up a mountain for nothing. And he couldn't bear it, so he reached for his rifle. Here is where the ledger goes strange, and I've never been able to write it clean, so I'll just tell it the way it happened and let you carry it however you can. Cyrus swung his rifle up toward Ineacutes, toward her, not Sella, because in his sickness she was always the real crime, and I got my own rifle up, but I was slow. I was too slow. I'm not the man I'd have needed to be. And Sella moved. Not toward Cyrus, not to fight. He stepped in front of her, that was all. That silent man who'd fought his whole war with a held hand and a steady look, fought the last of it the same way. He just put his body between the gun and the woman, the way he'd done everything, without a word, without weighing it, because he'd finished his weighing down on that flat weeks ago, and there'd never after been anything left to decide. And Cyrus's horse, his tall bay, half wild, spooked by the shout and the guns and the whole broken morning, Cyrus's own horse reared. The shot went into the sky. And Cyrus Pell, who'd never in his life been thrown, who prided himself on his seat, who'd worried his grievance all the way up a mountain from the back of that animal. Cyrus went off the back of it hard, and came down on the granite scree at the clearing's edge, and I heard the sound his shoulder made from 30 feet, and he screamed. His own horse, his own pride. 20 years of spite, and it ended with him in the dirt, in the caliche, the exact place he'd sent Ineacutes to die, thrown there by nothing but his own animal and his own fury, while 11 neighbors watched and not one of them moved to help him. Not one. That was the reversal and it was crueler than anything we could have done to him. They didn't kill Cyrus Pell. They did worse. They looked at him lying in the dirt he'd meant for her, and they saw him, finally, plain, a small, spiteful man who'd nearly made murderers of the whole lot of them, and they turned their horses around and rode back down the mountain and left him there. The mob he'd built, walking away from him, the way he'd taught them to walk away from her. Del Harmon was the last to go. He sat his horse a moment and looked at the 3 of us standing there, Sella still in front of Ineacutes, her hand gripping the back of his shirt. And Del took off his hat. Just for a second. Then he put it back on and rode down after the others without a word, and that was as close to an apology as that mountain ever heard, and it was more than most get. We didn't leave Cyrus. I want that written down. Ineacutes of all people was the one who went to him. She knelt down in the scree next to the man who'd hunted her, who'd have shot her 30 seconds before, and she looked at his shoulder with those healer's eyes, and she said it. It's an ugly thing to set a shoulder, and I won't describe it. Cyrus wept the whole time, from the pain and from something worse than pain, and he wouldn't look at her, and she didn't make him. She just did the work with her ruined hands, because that was who she was. That was the whole thing the town had tried to kill and couldn't. She fed a stranger who wanted to die, and she set the shoulder of a man who'd come to murder her, and she did neither one for thanks, and she did neither one loud. When it was done, she stood up and stepped back, and Cyrus got himself up onto his horse one-armed, and he sat there a moment. And I thought he might say something. I truly did. I thought a thing like that might crack even Cyrus Pell open. He didn't say a word. He turned his horse and rode down the mountain alone, and I never saw him again, and I heard he left the county before winter. Some men can be shown mercy, and some men can only be diminished by it. and I've never been sure which Cyrus was, and I've stopped needing to know. I stayed up on the mountain 3 more days, till I was sure the town had truly turned and wasn't just resting. Then I rode down. There wasn't a place for me up there. It was theirs, that cabin, that clearing, that hard, clean life. I was only ever the man who came late and stood on the third side. I saw them a handful of times over the years after. Not often. They kept to the high country and I kept to my range, and that was right. But once, I'll end on this because it's the truest thing in the whole ledger. Once, maybe 4 years on, I rode up with a side of beef as a gift near Christmas, and I came into the clearing and there was Cutes on the flat rock in the winter sun, mending a shirt. His shirt, far too big for her and her hands healed now, quick and sure with the needle. And there was a child playing in the dirt at her feet, dark-haired, serious, watching a beetle with the particular fierce attention of the very young. And Sella was splitting wood at the tree line, and he looked up when I rode in, and he didn't say anything, of course he didn't. But he lifted one hand. And I sat my horse at the edge of the clearing, the same edge I'd been afraid to cross the first time, an old ledger-keeping coward who'd learned late and cost the learning to others. And I looked at the three of them in the winter light, the thrown-away woman and the silent man and the child that wasn't supposed to exist because she wasn't supposed to live. And I thought, balance it, go on, put a number on it. This is the one, old man, this is the page, make it come out even. And I couldn't. I never could. Because there's no column for it. There's no figure you write down for a man who kneels in the dirt beside somebody the whole world threw away and says I choose you, get up, no price, no tally, nothing the ledger will hold. So I did the only thing left. I took off my hat, and I sat there in the cold with the beef going stiff across my saddle, and the child looked up at me, and Cutes raised her mended hand, and the wind came down clean off the peaks.